I'm Margo Sorum, and Yoga Therapist of Alaska is thrilled to pair up with ASD to offer you a yoga curriculum that will really benefit you and your students. As movement educators, it's really important to really identify the crisis that we're in. And our crisis is a movement deficit. What do I mean? Things that we used to do years ago, like when we go and get a drink of water, we just turn on a faucet. But years ago, we needed to get a bucket, go outside, find a water source, and then carry the water back. So things that we used to use our whole body for, we're now using buttons for, and using our hands rather than our whole bodies. So this is something that yoga really can benefit us in, that we can be in one place but use our body in a variety of ways. And within that variety of ways, going into a little bit of these planes of movement is helpful. So we have the Sagittal Plane, which means right and left hemispheres of your body, but it expresses itself in movement as moving forward and moving backwards. Now, really, we are linear thinkers, so we tend to always move forward, like when we walk, or when we run, when we swim the crawl stroke, when we ride a bike, when we sit down, even we're in a little bit of a forward bend, and when we just stand in neutral, we're in a forward bend. So almost all of our movements are forward bending. And even most of our athletic sports are forward moving. We're going towards a goal or a basket, so moving forward. But yoga loves to emphasize moving backwards. So we'll start to highlight back bending as a nutritious movement that's required in our daily life. It's a gift of yoga, is these back bends. In addition, we have the Coronal Plane. And in the Coronal Plane, we're talking about the front part of the body and the back part of the body. And it expresses itself in adduction, of being kind of onto oneself, and as that abduction, as being wide. And in our daily life, we tend to be very adducted. We're very kind of towards the midline. And so yoga helps us to express ourselves on this bigger plane, a little bit more like Da Vinci's Divine Man, and making sure that we fill up every inch of our own personal space. The other aspect to this coronal plane is lateral bending. And kind of long gone is that time when we need to lean over and roll down somebody's window. We're pushing a button to lower the window down. So this lateral movement is a real gift of yoga, as well as this abduction and these wide and broad expanded movements that yoga has to offer. And then lastly is the transverse plane of movement. And this transverse plane of movement is tricky. It divides the upper body from the lower body, but it's really this idea of moving in a twist through rotation. And again, many of us are a little scared of twisting. If you've had a spinal injury, a lot of times that they'll prescribe not to do twists. But the reason why is usually the twist might have caused the injury, because we tend to forward bend and go into a twist and then pick something up. Whereas we want to just do a healthy forward bend without a twist. But without weight bearing, twisting is super important. And again, one of the main gifts that yoga has to offer us. And our different parts of our spine have different capacities for twisting, because the way that the vertebrae are made and created, the way they fit together and stack, different parts have different capacities for movement. So we'll do a workshop on healthy twisting, so that becomes a movement that really benefits your student. So kind of in recap of this, we're in a movement deficit, and yoga has a lot of answers, because we're going to focus on back bending, we're going to focus on abduction, on lateral bending, and on twisting, these movements that are kind of lacking in our diet. But going back even a step more, when we start yoga, yoga is this ancient movement practice, thousands and thousands of years old, and it really was done with the understanding or the assumption that you have good posture. I'll repeat that. Yoga really assumes that you have good posture. But the problem is, we are in a posture epidemic and crisis. How do we know this? Because of the knee surgeries, hip surgeries, back surgeries, hip replacements, knee replacements. We are wearing out our joints sooner than their time. Even just over 100 years ago, we didn't have these issues and problems. And it's because standing with good posture was normal. And in fact, having good posture was in fashion. So let me give you an example that you might all relate to. If you've ever watched Downton Abbey, it was starting about the time of the Titanic, I believe 1912, around that time. And you can see at the beginning of this show that the women were regal in their posture. They were wearing corsets, which I don't approve of. We want to have our own internal strength and our own personal corset. But the fashion was to wear corsets to help achieve this beautiful, regal posture. But shortly hereafter, it was about the time of the 1920s, that posture changed and fashion changed. And having formal, good posture became outdated. That actually slouching became the new fashion. And it's actually called couture fashion, and it translates as broken doll. So as kind of contorted and broken as we can be, became the new fashion. Whereas in yoga, we're just assuming that you're on your axis, that you have a plumb line, that as much of the front of your body and as much of the back of the body is in plane. So I have a resource for you, and it is this Natural Posture for Pain-Free Living by Kathleen Porter. It's a book available with you for the school district. And in this book, it really goes through and explains what does good posture mean, look like, and what are the health benefits. But really, we can kind of let this be a far-reaching idea, because when I'm sitting with my good alignment, my cardiovascular system is working at its best. There's no crimping and pinching of the veins in a way that causes problems. But you can notice as soon as your posture goes sloppy, it becomes a cardiovascular issue, where the veins are in fact compressed in ways that cause harm. So not only do we need to approach your yoga with this idea of diverse movement, but we also need to start to instruct yoga in a way that teaches good posture. And this is a baseline that does not occur in a lot of yoga classes. Again, yoga assumes you have good posture, except culturally we have wretched posture. And even as teachers, we might have bad posture habits. And so we're in this together. This is something that you can really empower your students with, that this is something you need help with, that they need help with, that we collectively as a society need to address and have help with. So even as we do this video and I give some of the assessment tools, take it with a grain of salt that I'm not perfect either, that I've been on this journey actually for almost 20 years. I've been obsessed about posture and movement, but still it's a lifetime practice. It's not something we learn in one session. It's something that you're going to learn and start to observe in your students and in yourself. So we're going to offer a couple of assessment tools for you next. I'm going to demonstrate a couple of things on my own, and then I'm going to have a helper come in and just show some assessment tools of the plumb line. So I'm going to stand up and show a couple of examples. So the assessment that we're going to start out with is how to just stand with good posture. This pose is called Tadasana, and you're going to strive to have the feet pointing forwards, that the weight is back in the heels, and that the weight is even right to left. And it's helpful to even close the eyes to find this, and you may even feel that you can feel your weight shift forward or back or right to left, and you are kind of finding this balance. Tadasana is in fact a balanced pose. In fact, standing is a balanced pose. Notice the difference if I put all my weight into one position. I wore these clothes on purpose a little bit to show that they start to wrinkle and do funny things, and you can see the patterns change. You can see different shoulder heights, different hip heights. And so the new kind of assessment is, can the student stand even in their bones? From the side view, when we're standing on the axis, and you'll see this in a moment with the belt, but half of my body is shown in front and half of my body is shown in back. Rather than kind of common postures, the kind of zealous yoga student who tries to stand up straight ends up coming too far forward. And you can see that so much of my body's forward and there's so much tension here in my back and my rib cage to hold this posturing, that what tends to happen is that's not maintainable, and so we kind of end up doing this slunch, where you can see too much of my body is behind me. The other thing that will be kind of talked about a lot in this class is this idea of neutral being anterior pelvis. So anterior pelvis is where the ASIS is facing forward, and that there is a tail behind you, that you can move your tail. Neutral pelvis tends to be a little bit of a tuck, and posterior pelvis is very tucked. So neutral positioning is fully untucking the pelvis and having a healthy rear end, that the buttocks and the glutes are really strong. And it does take some time to develop an eye for this. So Mai is going to come and help us show an assessment tool with a belt. I could also use this with a dowel, or any number of things, but today we'll use the belt. And she's going to show this kind of from the side for us. Perfect. You'll have kind of the D-ring or the heavy part of the belt down so it can just hang straight. And ideally what we're going to do is joint stacking. So in this position, if I'm standing well, you're going to see this at the ankle, the knee, the hip, the shoulder, and the earlobe is all kind of in a straight plumb line. She's going to keep this just hanging just like this. But notice if I try to stand with good posture, I move way forward of this plumb line. I can come back to that neutral plumb line, but there's also this idea that sometimes we slouch or have that as our plumb line. And again, too much of the body is forward and not on the line. And my clothes go funky. Good. Thanks, Wayne. So Tadasana for week 1 and week 2 will be kind of your diagnostic and starting to introduce this idea of good posture and starting to notice this standing in 2 feet even and with the feet forward. As soon as we turn the feet out, what tends to happen is the pelvis shifts forward and tucks under. And you can really see that as I stand here, and literally as I just turn my feet out, it does pull the posturing forward. And a lot of your students will probably walk duck-footed, and so the new orientation is to have the feet forward so the hips are back. And standing is a forward bend. A lot of people are actually standing at a back bend, and as you know, the bony processes here are not meant for weight bearing. It's the spinal discs and the abdominals that are meant for weight bearing. So standing is a forward bend, and we want to start to begin our journey there, is that neutral forward bend, that sagittal plane as our kind of human neutral. In the next session, we'll end up talking about the 5 directions of spinal movement, and these happen to correlate really well with the 5 directions of yoga movement. So, namaste.